if you did. After becoming increasingly convinced that the QAnon phenomenon was following the pattern of something called an alternate reality game, or an ARG, I did a large amount of research into this theory, but I was very surprised at how much I found and how correct I actually was. First off, alternate reality games, or ARGs, are very detailed and often large gaming campaigns, similar to a large-scale thematic escape room of sorts, but a game that uses the real world as its levels, and one in which you play as yourself. ARGs can be designed by large companies or individuals themselves, and they can include gameplay that involves interacting with the physical world, or mostly gameplay which involves doing internet research and looking for strange details on obscure websites. Does that sound a little bit like Q to you? It did to a heck of a lot of people who put forth this theory before me. But since the culture of ARGs and MAGA exist within such a wide demographic pit between the two sides that they're very unlikely to ever interact or meet with one another. Now, this was one of the reasons that I thought that doing this research was so important. But one of the first people who did make this connection was Adrian Hon. Adrian Hon is a game developer and a neuroscientist who is a living legend in the ARG space. Hon was the first one to write about this with these tweets. Theory: QAnon is popular partly because the act of researching through obscure forums and videos and blog posts, though more time-consuming than watching TV, is actually more enjoyable because it's an active process. Game-like, even, or ARG-like, certainly. Today, ARGs generally don't have stories. They're more like puzzle trails. But back in the day, 2000 to 2010, they were all about the stories. Purposely fragmented, contradictory, confusing, sprawling stories. That totally gave me chills the first time I read it. Hon also tweeted, "Maybe stories isn't the right term. More like fictional worlds populated by a kaleidoscope of characters, and they demanded communities to piece them together to reconstruct the meaning." Which, that just, it really shows that's so Q to a T. There's a formulaic aspect to this. It's pretty clear. After I found these initial connections between Q and ARGs, I became curious at what others I might have missed. So I did a deep dive into ARG development and looking at a way to try to compare them to the Q posts so I could try to explain and understand these connections easier. In my opinion, it's essentially an ARG scenario about supposed white hat patriots embedded within the deep state. And it's something that attempts to use gamified or community-driven types of participatory propaganda. I think that the goal of it is isolating the Q players and really sort of rewiring their brains so that they begin to view the entire world through the lens of Q. For this video, I'm just going to stick with the ARG-like elements though. So if you research ARG development, you'll come across, there's a glossary or there's a certain amount of core concepts which embody the art. When I looked at these specific connections and these terms, the light bulbs that it illuminated with regard to what I saw going on with Q, in my opinion, it was nothing less than miraculous. So I have a list here of those terms, and I'm going to go through and then explain and compare those. The first term we have is the rabbit hole. Now, of course, this is a reference to Alice in Wonderland, and it's also a popular Matrix and conspiracy trope, but this is absolutely a bedrock concept when it comes to ARGs. So in ARG terms, what the rabbit hole actually is it's the medium or the device that a player will use to begin playing the ARG and encounter the next clue that it's got served up for you. So whatever it is. A rabbit hole could be a phone number, a video, a website, a blog post, or anything that developers think that people would find interesting enough to pursue. People can make their own ARGs, or they can be very, very complex and highly staffed operations. You can find posts about all the best sorts of ways to make rabbit holes. They can be very simple. Rabbit holes can be very obvious, or they could be just implied. But they should do their best to be realistic and seem like they might actually be reality. If you think about the movie The Game with Michael Douglas, that's probably pretty similar in a lot of. My theory is that the first post that Q ever made was the post that was intended to be seen as the rabbit hole in order to get players to enter the world of Q. It offered a proposition that was far, far, far too tantalizing for most Trump supporters to ignore at the time. Consider what happened in this clip.
It's just awfully good that someone with the temperament of Donald Trump is not in charge of the law in our country.
Because you'd be in jail.
Secretary Clinton.
In addition to the irresistible rabbit hole bait, another clue is that it also seems to give you your first quest to determine the actual happenings of these supposed joint National Guard operations. I personally tried to do research into this and used some advanced search engine features. This was long after, but I found out very quickly that due to the fragmented nature of the way that the Guard is organized, it's very, very difficult to find any sort of information on joint operations like this. So this is just a very good way to waste your time for a certain amount of time, in my opinion, anyhow. Even so, it got people in the mode of trying to search the internet and Google specific things that Q was talking about. And I think this is basically trying to get people into the mode of what the QAnon ARG gameplay is supposed to be like. So that's why they sent you on this wild goose chase. From the ARG glossary, the next concept that we have is the collective detective, which is exactly what all the Anons believe themselves to be. And a lot of this all this content that's been created, and which is more like fan fiction as opposed to actual political analysis. But that's what they believe themselves to be, and that's what Q encourages them to be. Another ARG term is the puppet master, which is the name for those who are working behind the curtain to carry out the ARG campaign. But Q is referred to puppets and puppet masters quite a few times, and it also, when he says that, it lets him avoid naming any significant names, which might actually expose him. Another one of the core ARG terms that Q often echoes is Shill. In ARGs, Shills are often members of opposing camps who are posing as their competition in order to achieve some sort of end. And of course, it's not being done honestly. But Q seems to go on incessantly about the Shills. or at least a decent amount. Another ARG term that is highly, that just it blows my mind is TINAG, or this is not a game. Now, this is one of the core terms of ARGs. It's a philosophy as well as a mantra that players just run around while they're playing, you know, an ARG or whatever, and saying, this is not a game, this is not a game, you know, just because it's fun or whatever.
Terrarium is an alternate reality game.
And alternate reality games use what's called this is not a game aesthetic.
You have to design bigger than what the players can imagine.
Everything from
Online documents,
design challenge,
emails,
puzzles.
student videos,
There's a course called The Ends of Civilization,
faculty videos.
reverse escape room.
We created this lab, a logo and a uniform.
But this term has been used and abused and then reused by Q. I'm not rapping anymore. But so many times that it's just dizzying. It's just over and over. But there's also some of it that's like a little bit more subtle, where it's not just, this is not a game, where he just says, shall we play a game? Or, you know, want to play a game, or just it's phrased slightly differently. But this is just, it's one of those other references that it lets you know that this is a game. This is a gamified event through and through. Another important ARG term is trail, which is referred to as the steps that players will go through in order to traverse the ARG scenario, whatever it is. It might be a post, it might be looking on a website, finding a phone number, whatever it is. Well, Q has some similar progress. I believe that basically it's an ARG scenario that was designed to carry on almost indefinitely. That's why it doesn't really enforce hardly any sort of logical or any type of boundary on the anons and the decoders. Anything that is a little bit creative that players come up with in order to try to explain events that's going on, it's generally embraced. So it gives them lots of encouragement to give a lot of very messy thinking. I might be stretching a little bit with this one, but another one that I have heard is Bozos. And Q seems to relish talking about the clowns in America or the CIA. What Q differs from a lot of the traditional ARG gameplay, as I've mentioned, is that players are usually encouraged to avoid apophenia, or that is the tendency to identify clues or patterns of your own creation and therefore deviate from the real scenario the ARG developers have laid out. So it doesn't, usually they want you to stick to a more linear path, whereas Q does the absolute opposite of that. Almost any theory, no matter how absurd or how baseless, if it's remotely creative and interesting, it is embraced and it's thought of as being supposed intel. There is a whole lot more with this, and I really believe that the way that this is encouraged is a part of cognitive warfare. And if you're not aware of that, check out my other videos, because that's kind of how I found out this information, and they all sort of, for lack of a better term, bleed together. But I didn't realize how long it was going to take me just to explain these couple core concepts. So I don't want to go too much into stuff that's off this, so I'm going to do that in another video. Let me know if you have any questions, if you disagree, if you think I'm wrong, if you have anything to add to this. There's, I think, probably a lot more information that could probably be unearthed about just more stuff like this. You know, like they say, where there's smoke, there's fire. And I've found an absolute ton, just more than I can really put in videos. But I hope you enjoyed this. Please follow, subscribe, like, support my work if you want more of this stuff. Peace.